We start in Latin America, where the United Nations is making efforts to fight the consequences of climate change. Peru is hosting UN's climate change conference, kicking off this week. Officials are expected to take some key steps in curbing emissions during the summit. CCTV's Dan Collyns joins us live from Lima, Peru, at the end of the first day of negotiations. Dan, what did they accomplish on the first day, and what is the mood?
Well, one senses a mood of optimism here in Lima. I think there's a feeling that there's enthusiasm about what lies ahead, and that meaningful agreements can be made. Now, this is the last pit stop before the Paris conference in 2015 next year, where negotiators will aim to strike a binding deal for all countries to combat climate change. So the job of Lima is to come up with a draft text which will be negotiated and finalized in Paris next year. And the UN Paris Climate Change Conference is very important because it will be the agreement which replaces the much criticized 1997 Kyoto Protocol. So that certainly added a sense of urgency and a sense of purpose to these talks, even though we're only on the first day of 2 weeks at this stage.
The annual United Nations Climate Summit has been a world fixture for more than 2 decades. But for this, the 20th Conference of the Parties, or COP20, expectations are unusually high. The president of the host nation, Peru, laid out his vision of its importance.
In all, we need everyone to do more, but we need the big countries to lead, and we need the most developed countries, which have the technology and the resources, to lead disproportionately. And I think that is both for historical reasons, but also for practical reasons.
It's come on the heels of the United Nations Climate Summit in New York and a stark report issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, which stressed that time was running out to drastically cut emissions in order to avoid a 2 centigrade global rise in temperature. Last month, China and the United States made a historic pledge to reduce their greenhouse gas output. China agreed for the first time to cap emissions, setting a goal for them to fall after 2030, while the US committed to cut its emissions by a quarter or more by 2025. Nobel Prize winner Rajendra Pachauri, the IPCC's chairman, told CCTV of his optimism, despite the panel's latest report.
In the case of climate change is that we don't have the luxury of time. If we don't take adequate action and timely action, then clearly the impacts could become so huge and so serious that we would find it very difficult to be able to deal with them in the future. So I would say that in this case, a certain sense of urgency will come into negotiations that lead to a favorable result in Lima as well as in Paris.
The Lima conference is expected to put together the first draft of an accord to cut carbon emissions to be delivered in Paris in 2015. More than 3,000 negotiators from nearly 200 countries will hammer out the details over the next fortnight. For Peru, this will be the largest and most important summit it's ever hosted, thrusting this South American nation onto the international stage. While some observers predict another failure, the host nation will be doing everything it can to make it a success. But the bigger countries will have to do the heavy lifting. The UN's Assistant Secretary General, Robert Orr, tells CCTV.
In all, we need everyone to do more, but we need the big countries to lead, and we need the most developed countries that have the technology and the resources to lead disproportionately. And I think that is both for historical reasons, but also for practical reasons.
With China, the US and the European Union taking the lead, will other nations, both big and small, follow suit?
So, Dan, is there a sense that will actually happen?
Well, that's the hope. The hope is that the commitments made by the 3 biggest polluters, that's China, the US and the EU, will spur other G20 nations mainly to make commitments too. I'm talking about Japan, Australia, Canada, among others. And also emerging economies like India, which at the moment is not a big emitter, but is predicted to become one of the biggest emitters in the next few decades. But even with the commitments made by China, the US, and the EU, the international or intergovernmental panel on climate change predicts that that won't go far enough to make the 40 to 70% cuts in emissions which will be necessary by 2050 to avoid a 2 centigrade rise in global temperature. So we are looking down the barrel of a gun in many ways here. This has been the starkest report by the UN's panel of scientists in many years. And the effects, of course, we all know, the expected effects of climate change are already being experienced around the globe. With the 2 centigrade rise, those effects will be much worse.
All right, thank you so much. CCTV's Dan Collyns.